Jack Matthews wasn't the type of man who sought attention or glory. At 35, he had already seen more than his fair share of life in the military. 2 years stationed overseas, countless missions, and too many nights spent wondering if he'd make it home to his wife, Lisa. He held onto that thought, the dream of coming home to her, to the quiet life they had built together. It was a cloudy afternoon when Jack returned to his suburban neighborhood, driving through the familiar streets in his old truck. The houses, the trees, even the cracked pavement felt like they had stayed the same. But as he turned onto his street, something caught his eye. A sleek, black Mustang sat at the far end of the block. Jack knew every car on this street. It was a close-knit community, and this one was a stranger. His gut instinct told him something was off, but Jack pushed it down. He had been away for 2 years, after all. New neighbors? Maybe a friend of Lisa's? He pulled into the driveway, his heart racing with excitement and nerves. He hadn't told Lisa he was coming home early. He wanted to surprise her. As he killed the engine and stepped out, the Mustang loomed in his periphery. He squinted, then shook his head, grabbing his duffel from the truck bed. The familiar creak of the front door greeted him as he stepped inside. "Lisa!" His voice echoed through the house, but there was no answer. The place was eerily quiet, and Jack felt the first flicker of unease crawl up his spine. He tossed his duffel on the floor, glancing around. Everything looked the same, well, mostly. A few new decorations, a different set of photos on the walls. He noticed some unfamiliar wine glasses on the counter. Jack frowned. Lisa wasn't much of a drinker, especially not wine. But then again, 2 years is a long time and people change. As he walked through the hallway, his boots heavy against the hardwood floor, Jack noticed a jacket draped over one of the dining room chairs. A man's leather jacket. His stomach tightened. Before he could process what was happening, he heard voices coming from the kitchen. One was Lisa's, unmistakably, but the other, a man's deep voice, casual, as if this were his home. Jack's blood ran cold. He crept closer to the kitchen door, pressing himself against the wall to listen. "I'm telling you, he's not coming back for another 2 months," Lisa's voice said, soft but with a hint of tension. The man's voice responded, "And what if he does? What are you going to do? You've been lying to him for how long now?" Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he pieced together what was happening. He inhaled sharply, fighting the urge to burst through the door. Instead, he forced himself to remain calm, to listen. "I'll deal with it," Lisa said, her voice strained. "He won't know. He doesn't need to know." Jack clenched his fists. The man's laughter followed, cruel and dismissive, and Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always trusted Lisa, but now everything felt like a lie. 2 years of thinking she was waiting for him, when, in reality, she had been with someone else. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped around the corner and into the kitchen. The sight of Lisa sitting at the kitchen table with another man, a tall, rugged guy with short, dark hair, hit him like a punch to the gut. Both of them froze when they saw Jack standing there. Lisa's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing in shock, while the man's eyes narrowed in confusion. "Who the hell is this?" the man said, his voice sharp and defensive. Jack stood still for a moment, his eyes flicking from Lisa to the man. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his training kicked in. "Stay calm. Assess the situation." "I'm her husband," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "Who the hell are you?" The man blinked, then glanced at Lisa. "Wait, what? You said you were single." Lisa's face contorted in panic, her hands shaking as she tried to stand up. "Jack, I can explain." But before she could even start, the other man, clearly just as blindsided as Jack, took a step back, his eyes widening as the realization hit him. "You told me you were single," the man said again, this time with more venom in his voice. He turned back to Jack, the tension in the room thickening. "I didn't know, man. I didn't know she was married." Jack's eyes locked onto Lisa's. He could feel his rage simmering beneath the surface, but he wasn't going to lose control. Not yet. This wasn't just a matter of betrayal. It was a web of lies that Lisa had spun around them both. And now, standing in this kitchen, Jack knew he wasn't the only one being played. For a long, tense moment, no one said anything. Then, Jack spoke, his voice calm but ice-cold. "We're going to talk," he said, his eyes never leaving Lisa's face. "All three of us." And in that moment, Lisa realized she was about to face the consequences of her deceit. Consequences she hadn't anticipated. The air in the kitchen was heavy with tension as the three of them stood frozen, locked in this uncomfortable, unspoken standoff. Jack could feel his pulse in his temples, but he remained stone-faced, refusing to give Lisa the satisfaction of seeing how badly she had hurt him. The other man, who still hadn't introduced himself, shifted awkwardly, running a hand through his hair. His confusion was evident, and though Jack's anger toward him was justified, he sensed that this guy was just as much a victim of Lisa's lies as he was. Lisa finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Jack, please just let me explain. I didn't mean for things to happen like this." Jack's eyes darkened as he stared at her. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Lisa, I've been fighting halfway around the world, thinking about you every damn day. And this is what I come home to." The other man, finally gathering his bearings, stepped forward. "I think I deserve an explanation too," he said, his voice more assertive now. "Who the hell are you, really?" Lisa's face flushed with panic, her eyes darting between Jack and the man, whose presence was becoming more agitated by the second. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't seem to come. For the first time in their entire relationship, Jack saw something he had never seen in her before. Pure, unadulterated fear. The silence dragged on, and Jack wasn't going to let her get away with a simple apology. "Sit down," Jack ordered, gesturing to the kitchen table. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Lisa hesitated for a second before complying, sinking slowly into one of the chairs, her fingers twisting nervously around the edges of her sweater. The other man followed Jack's lead and sat down as well, albeit more reluctantly. He was still looking at Lisa, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. Jack leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. He was in control now, and he was going to get answers. "Start talking," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "And don't you dare lie." Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes darting between the two men like a cornered animal. "His name is Aaron," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. We met a few months ago after your last deployment." Jack nodded slowly, motioning for her to continue. "I wasn't looking for anything, I swear," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "It just happened. I was lonely, Jack. You were gone, and Aaron slammed his hand down on the table, causing Lisa to flinch. "Stop with the excuses, Lisa. You told me you were single. You lied to me. I didn't know you had a husband until this moment." Jack glanced at Aaron. The man's anger mirrored his own, though his was more focused on betrayal than humiliation. Still, there was a cold comfort in knowing they both had been duped. "I didn't know how to tell you," Lisa continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't know what to do." Jack scoffed. "Didn't know what to do? How about not seeing someone behind my back while I'm overseas? How about not dragging another guy into this mess?" Aaron spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't know you, man, but I'm sorry. I didn't sign up for this." Jack nodded, appreciating the honesty, even if the situation was maddening. He looked back at Lisa, his jaw clenched. "You had 2 years to figure this out, Lisa. You had time to make a choice. But instead, you let this go on for months." Lisa sobbed quietly, but Jack wasn't moved. Not this time. Aaron leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "So what now? What are we supposed to do? Pretend this didn't happen?" Jack shook his head. "No, we don't pretend. We deal with it." The word "we" hung in the air for a moment, and Jack realized that, strange as it was, Aaron wasn't the enemy here. He had been deceived just as much as Jack had. Lisa had created this mess, and now she was going to have to face the consequences. "I'm not staying here," Jack said after a long pause. "I'm filing for divorce. As for you, Aaron, you do what you want, But this woman, he looked at Lisa with cold detachment. She's not worth either of us fighting over. Aaron looked up at Jack, his eyes hardening as he processed the words. He wasn't a hothead, and though the situation was humiliating, he wasn't going to waste his energy on Lisa anymore. He glanced at her once more, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. I'm done too. Lisa's eyes widened, her voice breaking. Wait, what do you mean? You're both just leaving me? Jack's face remained unreadable. You made your choice. Now we're making ours. Lisa's tears fell freely now, her face twisted in desperation. She reached out as if to grab hold of something, but there was nothing there, nothing left for her to cling to. Jack watched, emotionless, as Aaron stood up, his jaw set in frustration. I didn't sign up for this, Aaron said again, more to himself than anyone else. He grabbed his jacket, turning toward the door. I'm out. Lisa, still sobbing, reached toward him. Aaron, please. I didn't mean to lie to you. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I was just... Aaron stopped in his tracks and turned, his face hardened by the betrayal. You knew exactly what you were doing. You thought you could have both of us at the same time and get away with it. His voice was sharp, cutting through her pleas. But you didn't, and now you're losing both. Jack remained silent, watching the scene unfold with cold detachment. Aaron didn't wait for her response. He shoved the front door open and left without another word, slamming it behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. For the first time since Jack had come home, Lisa was completely alone. She slumped in the chair, sobbing, her hands covering her face. Jack could hear her muttering apologies through her tears, but the words were meaningless to him now. Whatever emotions he had felt for her were buried under the weight of her lies. Jack stood there for a moment, looking down at her. He could still hear her pleas, muffled by her sobs, but they barely registered in his mind. This was no longer his problem. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Without another word, Jack turned and left the kitchen, heading down the hall to the bedroom. He needed to grab a few things before he left for good. As he packed a small bag, his mind wandered back to Aaron. The man was a stranger, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were both victims of the same deception. Two men fooled by the same woman. As Jack zipped up his bag and headed back toward the front door, Lisa stood in the hallway, her eyes red and puffy. She looked like she wanted to say something, but Jack didn't give her the chance. I'm leaving, he said flatly, pushing past her. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. Jack, please, she choked out, grabbing his arm. Don't go. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll make it right. Jack pulled his arm away, his voice cold. You can't fix this, Lisa. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. And with that, Jack walked out of the house, leaving his wife behind in the wreckage she had created. As Jack stepped outside, the cool breeze hit his face, a stark contrast to the heated emotions boiling inside him. He scanned the street, noticing Aaron standing a few houses down, leaning against his Mustang, clearly waiting. Jack approached him, feeling a strange sense of solidarity with the man he had just met under the most bizarre of circumstances. Aaron looked up as Jack neared. I didn't know, man, he said again, his voice more subdued now. I had no idea she was married. She told me she was single, that she'd been living alone. Jack shrugged. I believe you. Doesn't matter now. There was a pause, both men standing in the street, trying to process the whirlwind that had just crashed through their lives. Finally, Aaron spoke again, his voice calm but steely. You leaving her for good? Yeah, Jack replied. I'm not sticking around for this mess. She's not worth it. Aaron nodded, his expression mirroring Jack's resolve. Neither am I. I'm not gonna let her keep playing me like a fool. They both stood there, the shared betrayal binding them in a way neither of them had expected. It was an odd, silent agreement, one that neither of them would have predicted. Jack glanced at Aaron's Mustang, noting the man's careful demeanor, the way he carried himself. This wasn't a man who would be caught off guard easily. yet Lisa had played them both. "So, what now?" Jack asked, his tone neutral. Aaron smirked slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Revenge, maybe? You ever been into that?" Jack considered the idea, his lips forming a tight line. Revenge wasn't his usual go-to, but after everything that had happened, the thought had a certain appeal. "Depends on the plan," Jack said, a cold glint forming in his eyes. "What do you have in mind?" Aaron's grin widened just a bit. "We both walk away from her, sure, but maybe we don't just leave it at that. Maybe we make her realize just how badly she screwed up." Jack's interest peaked. "I'm listening." Aaron stepped forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "I've been in real estate for a while. Got some connections. How about we make her life as uncomfortable as possible? We take away everything she values. Money, status, the house. We could make sure she ends up with nothing." Jack nodded slowly. It wasn't just about hurting Lisa for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming control, something she had taken away from both of them. And there was something poetic about watching her lose everything she thought she had won. "I like it," Jack said, his voice low, "but I have some ideas of my own. We'll need to plan this out carefully." Aaron smirked, a dark glimmer in his eye. "Carefully, huh? All right, soldier. I'm in." And just like that, an unlikely alliance was formed. Two men, bound by betrayal, now united in their quest for revenge. Jack and Aaron spent the next few hours at a nearby bar, nursing drinks as they planned out every detail of their revenge. Both men had different skills, Jack's tactical thinking from the military and Aaron's connections in real estate, allowing them to craft a scheme that would systematically dismantle Lisa's life. The first step was simple: hit her where it hurt most, her finances. Jack, knowing his wife's financial situation inside and out, explained how she was dependent on his income for most of the bills. Aaron, who had a few friends in law firms, offered to get a fast track on divorce proceedings with the intent of draining Lisa's bank account through legal fees. "If we keep her busy with court cases and financial headaches, she won't have time to think about anything else," Aaron said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Jack nodded, a cold smile forming on his face. "And while she's distracted with that, we'll move on to phase 2. While the legal gears were set in motion, Jack and Aaron decided to enlist some help. Jack called up an old friend from his military days, Charlie, who had experience in private investigations. They needed someone to dig into Lisa's personal life, her movements, her secrets, and any dirt that could be used to accelerate her downfall. Charlie agreed to meet them in person. A few days later, Jack, Aaron, and Charlie sat in a dimly lit diner. Charlie, a grizzled, no-nonsense man, listened to their plan with interest. "So, you're telling me you want to burn this woman to the ground?" Charlie asked, raising an eyebrow. Jack leaned forward, his eyes hard. "No, we want her to burn herself. We just need to light the match." Charlie nodded, a sly smile creeping across his face. "All right, I can find out everything you need to know." It didn't take long for Charlie to uncover what Lisa had been hiding. She wasn't just seeing Aaron. There were other men. A pattern of lies stretched back even before Jack's deployment. And it wasn't just men. She had been embezzling money from a local charity where she volunteered, funneling funds into personal accounts under fake names. "She's playing a dangerous game," Charlie told them, handing over a folder full of evidence. Aaron smirked as he glanced through the documents. "Looks like we've got more leverage than we thought." Jack's anger burned deeper. His wife had not only betrayed him but was living a completely different life behind his back. And now, with this new information, their plan could take on a whole new dimension. Aaron used his real estate connections to put a plan in motion that would destabilize Lisa's life even more. He found out that the house Lisa had been living in was under Jack's name alone, which meant she had no legal claim to it. A few legal maneuvers and she would be out on the street. Within days, Jack served Lisa with divorce papers and a notice of eviction. Her reaction was immediate: frantic phone calls, desperate text messages. She couldn't believe Jack would leave her in such a vulnerable position, especially since she had nowhere to go. But Jack wasn't going to back down. He ignored her pleas, knowing this was only the beginning of her downfall. Lisa didn't take the eviction lying down. She started dating Evan, a wealthy businessman she had met through her social circle, in an attempt to secure her financial stability. Jack and Aaron caught wind of this through Charlie's investigation. Evan, however, was as cold and calculating as Lisa. He was using her just as much as she was using him. Jack and Aaron decided to dig into Evan's background, hoping to find a way to exploit the relationship. "What's his weakness?" Jack asked Charlie, who had been tailing Evan for a few days. Charlie smirked. "Turns out Mr. High and Mighty isn't so clean himself. He's got some shady deals going on in the corporate world. And I've got the proof." Jack and Aaron exchanged a look. This was their way in. Armed with dirt on Evan, Jack and Aaron devised a plan to make him cut ties with Lisa, leaving her stranded. They anonymously sent the incriminating evidence to Evan's competitors and the media, triggering a corporate investigation that had Evan scrambling to cover his tracks. As expected, Evan didn't want to be caught in a scandal, and he quickly distanced himself from Lisa, cutting off all ties. Lisa, who had been banking on Evan's wealth and connections, found herself alone once again. With Evan out of the picture, Jack and Aaron continued to tighten the noose around Lisa. They leaked her embezzlement activities to the charity board, which quickly pressed charges. Now, not only was she broke and homeless, but she was also facing criminal charges. The walls were closing in on her fast, and there was no one left for her to turn to. The legal battles drained what little money Lisa had left. Her once pristine social image crumbled as news of her scandal spread through the community. Former friends began to distance themselves from her, and she was no longer welcome in the places she used to frequent. For Jack and Aaron, watching Lisa's world collapse was satisfying, but they weren't done yet. There was still one final piece of the puzzle. Lisa's desperation led her to reconnect with an old flame, Tom, another man from her past who she believed could help her. Jack and Aaron, knowing she would try to latch onto someone else, had anticipated this move. They had Charlie approach Tom with information about Lisa's past and her current legal troubles. Tom, who had his own career and reputation to protect, quickly decided to cut ties with Lisa as well. When Lisa tried to call Tom, she was met with silence. Another bridge burned. Lisa was now truly alone. With no friends, no money, and no one left to manipulate, she had nowhere to turn. The charity's lawsuit was in full swing, and she was facing jail time for her embezzlement scheme. Her life, once full of parties, luxury, and deceit, had crumbled to dust. Jack and Aaron, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, satisfied with the results of their carefully orchestrated plan. With Lisa out of the picture, Jack and Aaron realized something unexpected. They had formed a strong bond throughout this ordeal. What started as a shared betrayal had turned into an unlikely friendship. They had both been used and deceived, but now they were free from the toxicity Lisa had brought into their lives. Over time, they began to hang out more, developing a real camaraderie. Jack, finally free from his toxic marriage, felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Aaron, too, found solace in knowing he had dodged a bullet by escaping Lisa's web of lies. Months passed, and Jack and Aaron moved on with their lives. Jack, who had re-enlisted in the military for another tour, found purpose again in his work, though this time he was more cautious with his personal life. Aaron, meanwhile, used his real estate connections to build his business and focus on his career, steering clear of any messy relationships. Despite their different paths, they stayed in touch, often meeting up to reminisce about how far they had come since their first encounter in that fateful kitchen. As for Lisa, her downfall was complete. She ended up serving time for her embezzlement charges, and upon her release, she was a shadow of her former self. With no money, no friends, and a tarnished reputation, she struggled to rebuild her life. Jack and Aaron didn't care. As far as they were concerned, Lisa had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. One day, Jack received an unexpected call from Charlie. "You're not going to believe this," Charlie said, his voice amused. "Lisa's trying to write a book about her experiences." Jack laughed. "A book? About what? Who knows? Maybe she's trying to paint herself as the victim." Wouldn't surprise me. Jack shook his head. Let her try. No one's buying what she's selling anymore. Meanwhile, Aaron had started dating again, this time with more caution. He met a woman named Melissa, who was kind, honest, and everything Lisa wasn't. Their relationship was built on trust and mutual respect, something Aaron had come to value deeply after the nightmare with Lisa. Jack, though single, was content with his life. He had found peace in his solitude and was in no rush to settle down again. Both men reflected often on how much they had learned from the experience. They had been naive to trust Lisa, but in the end, they came out stronger. They had forged a bond that, though unexpected, had become a source of strength for both of them. A few years later, Jack and Aaron met up at a local bar to celebrate Aaron's engagement to Melissa. As they reminisced about their journey, they couldn't help but laugh at how far they had come. To think it all started with that damn Mustang, Jack said, raising his glass. Aaron grinned. And a cheating wife. They clinked glasses, grateful for the strange series of events that had brought them together. Lisa, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. Her book failed. Her attempts to rebuild her social life were met with indifference, and she was left to live out her days in quiet isolation. Jack and Aaron, however, didn't give her a second thought. They had moved on, and Lisa was nothing more than a distant memory. Years after the chaos, Jack received a letter in the mail. It was from Lisa, apologizing for everything she had done. She begged for forgiveness, claiming that she had changed and wanted to make amends. Jack read the letter, then tossed it in the trash without a second thought. He had moved on, and there was no room for Lisa in his life anymore. Jack and Aaron's friendship remained strong over the years. They had each other's backs through thick and thin, and their shared experience with Lisa had forged an unbreakable bond. They had learned the value of trust, loyalty, and true friendship, things that Lisa could never offer. In the end, it wasn't revenge that brought them satisfaction. It was the freedom they gained from leaving behind the toxic web Lisa had spun. Jack and Aaron had come out on top, not because they had destroyed her life, but because they had reclaimed their own. And that, they both realized, was the best revenge of all.